Welcome to another episode of Drinking Iced Tea with Derek Tam-Scott.
It's not iced, but
okay,
it's tepid.
Sweetened, unsweetened green tea. I am Jason Cammisa, and this is episode 100 of the Carmudgeon Show.
Part of the Hagerty podcast network. In this episode, we accidentally discuss Bugatti, all based on a rumor that was supposed to just start the episode, but ended up hijacking the whole episode. But we do talk about Bugatti and its miscellaneous incarnations, including the current one, which involves Rimac, the one that I would say
otherwise known
now,
as Rimac.
Yes.
For the unwashed.
For the ones who don't speak Croatian.
Rimac.
And then the outgoing episode would be the VW era. Outgoing phase of Bugatti's history, which is the VW era. And then chapter 2, which would be the Italian chapter, Romano Artioli, EB110. And then the original Ettore Bugatti era. Chapter 1.
Yep. We are discussing what Bugatti should be, what Bugatti is, and how it relates to Pagani and Rimac and all these other things. Don't forget that if you're a fan of this stuff, you can support us or Hagerty by joining Hagerty Drivers Club, which gives you roadside assistance for all your classic cars, discounts on cool stuff, and a magazine. There's a link below. If you want to click on it, go for it. If you want to get an insurance policy, just do that.
Yeah, that's the place where it makes a big difference when you have to have an insurance claim. Which we hope not to do, but sometimes happens.
Shit happens. Brought to you by, that really should be Hagerty's slogan. Shit happens. Go fucking drive your car, because shit happens. Anyway.
All right. Carmudgeon Show. Ready, set, go.
Welcome back.
From
the Carmudgeon Show bumper.
Oh, yes. And the theme song.
Yeah.
Thanks for that.
You're welcome.
Not outer space.
So I feel like I should have started this episode with a song because there's a phrase that I want to say that's a song, and let's see if you know the song. It's I Heard a Rumor.
Oh, yes, I don't know it.
You don't know that?
No.
I heard a rumor. Anyway, so I sort of read something disturbing that Achim Anscheit, I think was his name, was the former tech director and designer at Bugatti, who's just retired, and confirmed on his way out the door that the replacement for the Chiron will no longer have a W-16 engine.
Was that like a spite, like I'm piecing out, or was it like this is my last thing as in professional, like official duty is to report this? Or
I did meet him once. I probably have his number and could ask him, but I think he'd probably say no comment. No, but he retired. And the official statement was that he waited until the next generation car had been fully gelled and they decided a bunch of things, and then he was able to pass the torch on. That's the official story. I suspect the real story is probably a little bit different. If you remember that Rimac and Bugatti are now the same company, sort of spun off by Porsche. And I'm sure there are a lot of changes there that, whether it's for the better or not, we'll find out. But a lot of changes that'll make,
I do trust Rimac.
I trust them to make a powertrain for sure. And that car was fucking great. That Nevera was really, really good. But does Rimac know what is best for Bugatti? I think those are very different markets. I don't know. Yeah. To be honest, I don't think Bugatti knows what's right for Bugatti. I think the Chiron is great, but they should be pioneering change rather than reacting.
And so what do you envision that meaning?
I think given the amount of speed that electric cars can attain, I think they probably should have been an early electric adopter. I mean, like the biggest missed opportunity in the business is Rolls-Royce. Rolls-Royce, that Phantom should have been 100% electric. Rolls-Royces are not used for long distances typically. They're used to shuttle someone to the theater, and there's nothing more wafty than an electric motor. And having just drove a Cullinan, wow, that V12 is wonderful, but who cares? That should have been electric. So Rolls should have been electric. I think Bugatti probably should have been electric or some sort of electrified.
Isn't that therefore redundant with Rimac?
Well, I thought that was what was going to happen when Bugatti was handed, when Rimac was handed the keys to the Bugatti castle, right? The idea there is that this is the future, Rimac is sort of pioneering the future of what's coming next for fast cars, and therefore they should be in charge of Rimac. But the rumor that I heard,
Bugatti.
Sorry, what did I say?
Rimac.
Where am I? Who are you?
This is the Carmudgeon Show.
Oh my God! No way.
Hello.
Are you Hyphen?
I am. You're on the Carmudgeon Show. You are the Carmudgeon Show. The call is coming from inside the house.
I know what you did last summer. Here's the thing. So that the interview with Achim basically said the next generation Chiron car the Chiron replacement will have a V8 with a hybrid system in it. I have a big fucking problem with that.
Do you think they should be full electric instead, or do you think they should be full W16? They should be W16 plus hybrid.
I just sort of think that here's my worry. This is going to be that same fucking Audi 4-liter that's in everything.
Ah, yes, the Porsche, Audi, Lamborghini.
It's not even the Porsche motor. There was a Porsche V8, and now that's been retired in favor of the Audi V8. And there's nothing wrong with that V8.
No, I mean it's used
Yes.
in the Porsche.
Right, but this is a fucking off-the-shelf V8 that's in everything from a Volkswagen to a Skoda to, I'm sure Skoda and Seat have their version of it.
V8s?
Yeah, to Bentleys, to whatever. And the Bugatti had its own bespoke W16. Mm-hmm. I don't think Bugatti should share anything with anyone, period. And at that
except
price
for
point,
mirror motors.
even that. I'm sure they can engineer a mirror motor that's quieter and quicker. You know, just like sort of servo operated.
That's very Bugatti.
Instead of, mirror motors sound like shit. I have a problem. Electrified, yes, sure. Do whatever the fuck you need to do to make it fast. A V8? Can you imagine if the next Bugatti sounds like all of the Audis with that flatulent V8?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah. I mean, what would be the way to do? They should have just kept a W16 or developed a new W16 and then added a hybrid system on top.
Here's the fucked up thing.
If you believe that Bugatti should be petrol powered at all.
Yes. But I think whatever propels the car, I think it should all be bespoke. It should be exclusive to that car. Mm-hmm. And you do know that W16 was new for the Chiron. Mm-hmm. Like that was not the same 16-cylinder that was in the Veyron. They have, or was it just the W12 that was new? Because the 12 is new and that's being retired also. So the W12 is being retired.
W12, the Bentley one?
The Bentley one was given. What the fuck did they do on this last one? Oh, direct injection. They did direct injection on this latest version, and they made a bunch of changes to that car that really smoothed that engine out. So that you would think a VR6, one of the best sounding engines of all time, times 2 would make for one of the best sounding and smooth and wonderful W12s, but it didn't. 12 was boomy and it was harsh, and they fixed all of that with the last version that debuted in the Bentayga. That was an all new 12. I'm pretty sure the 16 got all the same stuff. It got direct injection and was all based on the same stuff. So this is an engine that lasted for one car. Okay, being a large revision of an engine that lasted for another car. Why are they throwing it out? And I know they're throwing it out. The V8 can probably make 1,000 horsepower.
Doesn't matter.
Right. Doesn't matter. If that were the case, Ferrari
also
would have
need
a
1,500 horsepower now in a Bugatti.
Yeah. But is it about horsepower or is it about something exclusive and special and different?
Yes.
I guess Bugatti did historically make 4 cylinders.
Yeah.
And straight 8s.
And straight 8s, but never a V8.
No. I just think that's not the right...
I agree. I mean, but what is Bugatti? I mean, this is the fundamental question which Mate Rimac must answer right now. If it is a belief that it should be internal combustion, it should be the last... I mean, if you want to try and differentiate Rimac and Bugatti, if they're not competing with each other, then they have to develop their own identities. Rimac's, their branded cars, their identity is very clearly high-tech. Mm-hmm. It's modern, it's cutting edge, it owes nothing to nobody in the past ever at any point. It's totally clean sheet, totally future-looking. Bugatti is kind of the opposite. And so in some sense, when those companies are tied up, I saw, what seems logical, right? You have this really storied legacy prestige company whose golden era is the 1930s probably. And there's all of this history that you can draw on, and you can really make this art objet d'art, which is what those cars, do a pretty good job of doing, especially the Chiron more so than the Veyron, which was, I think, a little austere by comparison. But In terms of like detailing and luxuriousness, right? You get in a Chiron and you're just like, everything is beautiful, and the way that the little archy thing is, and it's just, it's not quite Pagani, but it's a lot more sort of beautiful. And
I think it's Pagani plus taste.
Yes.
Which means Pagani plus restraint, actually.
Yes, I agree.
I mean, the Veyron was the problem with the Veyron, right? The problem with the Veyron was when you started looking at details, the car becomes far more beautiful than it otherwise is, right? Every bolt, everything was meticulously crafted and beautiful. The Chiron, you don't have to go looking; it's immediately apparent that it's really special.
Yes, I agree with that. And so, before you get to a powertrain discussion, a Bugatti should absolutely be just gorgeous to look at. And that can happen if it has a V8, I suppose. But the technical content of a Bugatti historically has also been really out there too. I mean, like you look at the outside of a pre-war Bugatti's engine and it's, all machined and engraved and all this stuff. I mean, it should have the same level of technical innovation. And so obviously remounts, if you're going to hybridize it, can provide that. They've already done that for Koenigsegg. But yeah, I think the internal combustion engine part of it, if it's going to have one of those, needs to be this centerpiece, and it needs to be this, equally jewelry-ish device. So yes, the W16 certainly did that. If you needed to downsize to 8 cylinders, I guess it should be a W8. That makes no sense because there are no W8s kicking around anymore. But it should be something interesting.
I mean, the W engine debuted with a W8.
Yes.
Let's not forget. But that's W8 doesn't really work because it's a 72-degree bank angle with two 15-degree VR4s that, I think it needed 3 balance shafts, if I remember correctly. Yeah, no, fucked up.
It should be something wacky, though. It shouldn't be the corporate V8 that's shared with every soccer mom schmuck in a Cayenne.
That V8 makes the power. It really makes great power, but it doesn't make the right noise. And I really, really hope that it's not the same. Like, could you imagine it's the same shit casting that, I shouldn't say shit casting, but like, this is fucking Bugatti we're talking about.
Yes. Shit for Bugatti, fine for everybody else.
Yeah, wonderful for everyone else. I mean, but I just, when I hear these kind of things, it's the same thing as the C63 AMG, which I have not yet driven, but that's a 4-cylinder.
Yeah.
It just fails on its face.
The concern about losing their way, about who are the people who buy these cars, right? The person who buys the C63 is the person who's like, I don't want this sort of namby-pamby 6-cylinder nonsense of the BMWs, horsepower and all that notwithstanding. You want something that's going to be a little bit thunderous. And, the noise of the modern Bugattis with the W16s has been a defining characteristic. It's just weird. It's different. It's like every time you describe the sound that you get out of one of those 16s, you're always defining it in terms of other things because you don't have the vocabulary, neither does any of the listening public, to understand what a 16-cylinder engine should sound like. It's like,
that's true.
I don't know. It's like nothing. You have to compare it to other things, and that's part of the mystique.
I want you to do that.
It's like a V8 and an inline 8 combined. Nobody knows what an inline 8 sounds like. 2
flatulent 4-cylinders arguing.
No, inline 8s don't sound like that.
The only inline 8s I've ever driven, was a Bugatti. Was a 1933 Bugatti GP car. And it was flatulent and angry. And
you must listen to the Alpha. The Alpha, to me, people do this with Buick straight 8s also, but they sound great. To me, it's like, it's clearly 8 cylinders, but it has, instead of having this sort of raggedness of a cross-plane V8 or the 4-cylinderness of a flat-plane V8, it has the music of an inline 6.
Yeah.
It's the music of an inline 6 plus 8, obviously 8 cylinders. It's really special. I think it's the best sounding car engine layout that exists. Inline 8?
I mean, this is the point at which the Carmudgeon show should pause and you and I should go listen to videos, but we're not going to do that. So we're going to have to discuss it in terms in words.
Yes, gross. So all of this to say that the one of the defining characteristics of modern Bugattis has been the engine, and so to put in the corporate V8, and of course this is all speculation anyway. We don't know what V8. Maybe they'll come up with some amazing magical V8 that has nothing to do with anything else. But still, by virtue of it being a V8, it's slightly pedestrian and slightly sort of poor. You know who never would have stood for this?
Who?
We can't say his name because then people will be like, "Is this the episode?" One of Ferdinand Porsche's grandchildren would never have stood for this.
His name was also Ferdinand.
We'll call him Ferdinand Fiech.
Ferdinand Fiecke. Okay, so Ferdinand Fiecke, who was the instigator for the Bugatti Veyron,
Yes.
would have never allowed. I think you're right. I think that's a really great point. Fiecke, sorry, I've said his name. Would have never allowed an 8-cylinder car. Now,
to do so is to completely just shit on the legacy that is supposed to be Bugatti, right?
Is it?
For Fiecke, from Fiecke's perspective.
Well,
to do something other than amazing.
Fiecke peaked, and his influence on the automotive industry peaked before turbocharging really became that much of a thing, right? So the W12 was sort of his instigation.
What year would you say that happened? That he peaked?
Let me just, without looking at a calendar, let me just put it this way. There was a time, remember, when BMW tried a V16 to outdo Mercedes, which was making a V12, right?
This is in the late 80s.
In the late 80s.
90s, the Goldfish.
The Goldfish
E32.
7 Series, yeah. And the idea there was just a limitation on the amount of power you could get out of a number of cylinders. BMW ran into that with the S54, the E46 M3, had 343 PS, 333 horsepower. And that was the absolute limit, according to BMW, because to get any more, To get any more power, they needed more bore. To get any more bore, they needed a longer block, which meant a longer crank. And then they couldn't rev it as high. Right, so power is a function of displacement times rev, effectively, and there were torsional vibrations in the crankshaft that they just couldn't get around. So they had no choice but to then go to a V8. Right, so that was the max of 6 cylinders. Turbocharging has fixed that problem, but so we were there. This was the era in which Fiecke was working when he said the Passat is getting a W8, and the Phaeton was getting a W12, and the Veyron was getting a W16. If you no longer need that many cylinders to make that much power, is there a suitable replacement? Remembering that through the world, the whole fucking Enzo speech from Paul Frere was that Enzo decided that a Ferrari had to be 12 cylinders, which I think I was very nice in the Dino revelations. I think this complete crock of shit. Enzo said a lot of shit he didn't mean, and that was one of those things because, of course, Enzo had been making 4 cylinders, inline 6s, multiple different V6s, V8s, and whatever other straight 8, every other layout you can come up with. He didn't give a shit about what the layout was. But when the V8 Ferrari, the Dino, the V6 came out, everyone's like, oh, it's not a Ferrari. It doesn't have a Ferrari badge on it because it's not a V12. Well, now here we are with the 296 as a V6, and I got to tell you, that engine is just as characterful as the V8, probably more so
than the naturally aspirated old V8. Are you talking about the 488
Then
V8?
The 488 V8, the current V8, the turbo. So the turbo V6, the turbo 120-degree V6 from the current 296 is more characterful and sounds better than the turbocharged V8.
Not a high bar, to be fair.
Okay, spoken from someone who doesn't like flat plane V8s, sure.
Well, which of those would you choose, a 458 or a 488?
I would choose a 360 or a 430. But yeah, I would go with the naturally aspirated one because although Ferrari's engines have a really nice, the turbos are vocal. So that's another extra added dimension on the V8 that I don't mind. I'm with you that flat plane V8s don't sound musical, but I do love them when they're flat out. It's just when you're not flat out and they're not wailing and screaming, they can be awkward. A 360 Challenge Stradale has so many weird resonances down in 4,000 RPM range where you're driving and it just sounds like a dump truck, and then it sounds like a UPS truck, and then it sounds like all different shit, and that's pretty cool. But the new cars are too isolated. So my question though is, are you and I curmudgeonly men stuck in the past where maybe it doesn't need to be a cylinder count? Maybe it's really
who
about...
the hell knows what the customer who buys a Bugatti actually cares about? Certainly not I.
Well, there's a wait list for a 296 with a 6-cylinder, and that's the thing I will say.
There's always a wait list for a new Ferrari.
Talk to the FF Owners Club of America. I think there was no wait list.
They're all dead.
No, but
they're all curmudgeonly.
I'm trying to ask if the question is that we are wrong in our visceral negative reaction to the idea of a V8 powered Bugatti, because I mean.
Yeah, the question is the public perception or is the buyer perception more important? I just think that the type of person who buys a Bugatti is interested in exclusivity. They're interested in differentness. They're interested in it's like nothing else. And to put the corporate V8 in Or
speculation,
any V8.
obviously. We have no idea.
Speculatively. This is the whole premise of this episode is going to look absolutely terrible in 4 years when it comes out and it's a W18 or something like that.
Oh, they just dropped the I don't remember who the fuck it was that interviewed him. Just dropped the one by mistake. No. They said it was going to have a V18. Shit.
Whoopsies. So I think it should be more than a V8.
Just on principle.
Yeah.
Even if that V8 is bespoke and doesn't share a single part with any other Volkswagen Group engine.
That's better, but it doesn't really fix it.
This is the problem because there have been some magical V8s. You know,
yes,
BMWs.
but those cars, BMW
wait,
versus Bugatti.
Wait. Okay, but BMW's cross-plane V8 with the crossover manifold that's in the X5M and that's got quite the noise.
It's a V8. It doesn't matter. You could be the most magnificent. It could be a Cosworth DFV Formula One engine from the 80s, 70s. It doesn't.
That would be pretty cool.
It's still a V8.
So would a flat 8 be okay?
Interesting.
Would an inline 8 be
Yes.
okay? So 8 cylinders are okay.
Yes, just
so
not a V.
Because it's too common.
It's too poor.
Oh my God. You're going to get crucified here in the comments. I'm trying to help you out, Derek.
No, it's just, that's what Bugatti's all about. It's about wealth, right? They always talk about how many like the average Veyron buyer had 3 private jets or something like that.
Holy shit.
The people who buy those cars need to have something that no one else has. It has to be extraordinary in every respect. And a V8 does not deliver that. I like V8s generally, depending on the circumstances. It's not right for that identity, that not right for that brand. They did, make concept Bugattis when Bugatti was being reinvented during the VW era with 18 cylinders, by the way.
Yeah.
But I don't know. They need to do something really extraordinary. That's the purpose of that brand. That's the thing that differentiates it from Rimacs,
Well, I think that was what PX got 100% correct with the Veyron. Was this wasn't just going to be an Auger d'Art. It was not just going to be a 16-cylinder car. It was not just going to be the fastest car ever made with the most horsepower and the whatever. It did it all, and it did it all in comfort, and that was it. It was just
except for the ride quality.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, that's the Veyron heard from that.
Yes.
That was a function of the tires, right? That was technology available at the time. The only way you could do 253 miles an hour, whatever the fuck it was, without the sidewalls blowing out was have sidewalls as stiff as concrete. But he really did nail that mission.
Yes.
I mean, the joke is that it's a Volkswagen product, and Volkswagen couldn't sell Phaetons because, nobody's going to spend $80,000 on a Volkswagen to be stupid. And yet they spent, it was only $1 million when it launched.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the funny thing. But, now $5 million out the door, no one has a problem with it because it really was.
Badged as a Volkswagen.
Yeah, but everyone knows it's a Volkswagen. I mean, and no one has a problem with it because the piece spoke for itself. It really did not share. Okay, there were certainly parts shared with lesser Volkswagens, but you never saw or interacted
like the
with
mirror
them.
Motors.
You're never gonna forget that, are you?
Or the key. The key is a letdown.
The key was a little bit of a letdown, but the Chiron key is much better if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
But that's true. Okay, so if we have to shit all over the Veyron,
do we?
No, I'm going to say if we had to, what did it get wrong? I mean, you think the styling is austere?
I think that the whole car is austere. I think it should have had this arrestingly gorgeous character to the styling, and I think then this may have been a functional constraint about aerodynamics and getting the car to perform the way that it was supposed to. But it would have been nice if it had been rendered in a slightly more handsome fashion. I think that they did a good job. Yeah, they did a much better job with the Chiron in that respect than they did with the Veyron. The joke is that they made at least 3, maybe 4 versions of the same car at the same time, which is the new Beetle, the TT, and the Veyron, right? They all are the same basic shape. Yeah. They're just sort of drawn out more. Yeah. In 911, if you want to throw it in there too.
I was just going to say that.
would be the 4th one. So right, which Beetle-shaped car do you want? Do you want the $20,000 one, the $40,000 one, the $100,000 one, or the $1 million one? Yeah. But so yes, I think that it could have been better in that respect. But I still think it's an incredible car to behold and to consider. I mean, we'll probably talk at length about the car more so than we are now when we do this sort of episode that may or may not ever exist.
Happen. Yeah, well, I think we're doing part of it right now.
We are. That's true.
But so you've driven all 4 variants of the Veyron?
No.
I think. Okay. So
Super Sport.
That's it.
Yes.
Holy God, fucking Derek out bougieing me. So Super Sport non-Vitesse, so closed car.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let's talk about this for a second because there were two Veyrons. There were two very different
You talked
Veyrons.
about this in your revelations.
Exactly, but I'm going to talk about it now, and I haven't done this research in 10 years, so I'm 5 years?
Like 4.
Whatever, it's 100 years ago. I did this I did all of this original research when I went on the press launch for the Super Sport.
Yes,
So
you
it was
made
the closed
Bugatti cry.
Loris Bugatti cry. Loris is the man behind the chassis dynamics of the second gen. He was involved with the first gen, but the Germans didn't listen to him. So the first gen car was a 1,000 horsepower car. It was a carbon tub, obviously W-16. The stories abound about the staff basically walking out on Piech when he gave them the list of requirements, which was 1,000 PS, 400 kilometers an hour, and
403.
403 was that's right, because that was the highest
the Peugeot went.
Highest speed ever recorded at Le Mans, right? So yeah, crazy list of requirements. A bunch of the team just walked because they thought it was not possible. Car was a huge technological achievement from the powertrain complexity of a W16, which is stupid, 2 VR8s, to
with 4 turbos.
Yeah, I mean that's something it's easy to forget. 4 turbos, a dual clutch, which was a novel kind of thing at the time, 4-wheel drive, and the joke was that it was carbon tubbed and supposed to be unbelievably light, and everyone shit on it because it weighed nearly 4,000 pounds. But what the engineers had said to me is if that car was 1 kilo lighter, it would have cracked in half under its own power. I mean, they just optimized the shit out of it.
1,100 pounds of engine transmission.
1,600.
16. Maybe 1,100 is just the engine.
It might just be just the engine. Yeah, I remember it being 1,600 pounds for both. Again, been a lot of years, but the 1,200 horsepower cars were actually a completely new car, and they, when I say completely new, I mean new tub. An entirely new tub. And when you're dealing with a carbon tubbed car, that is the single most important component of it. The engine was completely comprehensively re-engineered.
I mean, it has to be to get 20% more power.
That's the joke, is any modern car, you could get twice as much power. I mean, go look at a BMW B58, this BMW's current straight six, you can triple the output and it doesn't give a shit. But the original 1,000 horsepower car was so pushed to the limit that they really needed to make a lot of changes. And I had one conversation at that launch with one of the engineers, and he just kept telling me all this cool stuff. I wish we had actually prepared for this episode. Because he was just telling me all this little trivia, like the first time that they accelerated full throttle in first gear, the ramp up in speed exploded I think it was the AC compressor or the alternator bearing, right? They had to, because the car accelerated that much more quickly through first gear than the previous one with only 20% more power. Literally every gear in the transmission was redone for additional strength. I mean, they really went through and comprehensively re-engineered the car. The big change, though, is from the driver's perspective, where the first one feels like the world's fastest Audi with a jetpack on it. The 1,200 horsepower cars, both closed and open. So those are the two variants. You have 1,000 horsepower closed open, 1,200 horsepower closed open. The 1,200 horsepower cars feel like a Lotus Elise. Feel like a very big Lotus Elise.
Yeah.
Beautifully communicative steering, nose tucks handling where it'll tuck right in rather than wash out, and the back wants to play. And I noticed it immediately, having driven the first 2 cars and then flying over to Europe to drive the third one. And I was like, oh my God, this is a different car. It feels like an Elise. And that was what made Loris cry. He was so proud of his achievement.
Yeah, it genuinely feels athletic and sporting and keen and agile. It's a really marked, I guess, change, but I was very surprised by the character of the car, having read all of the things that I had about it, the Veyrons over the years.
Because the 1,000 horsepower car, they were competent, but they were competent in that perfect Audi
Joyless.
way. It's a little harsh. But yeah, I mean, that's the Audi way. I'm sorry to say, competent, but not joyful. The second one was night and day. I would have an open car because the sound of those turbos is something I will never ever forget. And I hate turbos. I hate turbos, automatics, and 4-wheel drive, and yet, holy shit. But then the Chiron was another comprehensive. So effectively, there have been 3 of those cars, and I don't believe there's been any substantive, massive changes to Chiron in the same way. Right?
I just don't pay attention to those cars.
I can't anymore. There's too many fucking versions.
I can't afford to.
I can't even afford to read the books on them.
Yeah.
But the Chiron that I've driven was very quick. I mean, I drove it in a straight line. That was for the filming of the drag race episode that we did. But the difference is immediate. As soon as you start the car, right? The Chiron, the Veyron, even the later one, you start it and it's there. Thundercloud looming in the distance, where the current car is deafeningly loud on startup and in the right way, in the absolute coolest way, all very deep boom. It sounds like something, and then it responds to throttle and launch control in ways that none of the Veyrons did. It's a much more immediate, quick driving experience, and a hell of a piece. But I just can't imagine starting that thing up and instead of hearing that that it does,
you hear like sort of the Urus noise. Like an Urus. Well, we'll see. This is entirely speculative. Is this the Bugatti episode?
I think we're at 28 minutes, so we're halfway through this episode. Might as well just keep talking about Bugatti.
Do we have other things to say on this topic, or are we going to transition?
What do you know about Bugatti?
Nothing. No. I mean,
what?
They're three companies effectively, right? There was I don't have enough research on this to talk credibly about the EB110.
That was a pretty cool car.
Yeah, it's a cool car. I just don't know enough about it to say anything.
Have you driven one?
Substantive? Nope.
No. Finally, an old car that I've driven. That was a really cool car because, all right, so chapter 1 was Bugatti, right? And we'll come back to that. Chapter 3 is obviously the Piac era, which is the Volkswagen era. And chapter 4, I guess, we're moving into, that's the Rimac era. But chapter 2 was a resurrection of a fully dead brand by a man named Romano Artioli. And his name should sound familiar because he also resurrected Lotus. And the Elise obviously was named after his granddaughter, Elisa, who I follow on Instagram, and she's just super cool. I think she got the last Elise off the line, or one of the last Elises off the line. How cool is it that she was, she's into the car, and she was actually under wraps at the launch of the debut of the Series 1 Elise. She was like 3 years old, and they hit her under the car, and then when they pulled the wrap off, this was Elise, and she had a little thing on that said, "I am Elise." Anyway, but Artioli, did he remake that? Did he reopen their old plant?
No, it was a new plant.
It was a new plant that they built? Okay, that's right. So Bugatti had previously been in France. Mm-hmm. He made a new plant in Italy.
And that was part of the pieckiness of reinventing Bugatti when they did, was that they got the old ancestral home of Bugatti in France, in Molsheim, because the previous iteration of Bugatti, number 2, was the one that was in Campo Galliano in Italy.
That's the name. I couldn't think of it a second. No, Campo Galliano. It's a beautiful name to say. But he resurrected Bugatti out of thin air and did sort of nothing the way it had been done. And that EB110 was a perfect Bugatti in the sense of its technology was completely batshit. So it was carbon fiber.
And performance.
Yeah. It was carbon fiber. It was an 8,000 or 8,500 RPM V12 with 4 turbos and 5 valves per cylinder.
3.5 liters.
3.5 liter. Little time. Same displacement as our Rover, which makes almost as much as 1/10 of as many horsepower. They sound great. That is one hell of a performant car. I drove one briefly. It broke. The battery died and the alternator wasn't charging it. And so I died on the side of the road. But up until that point, the turbo noises that thing made, I wish this was pre-smartphone, so I don't have any video of it. But holy hell,
this is the car that was
fast.
originally designed by Marcello Gandini, and then they didn't like that design, and they threw it out and started over again. So the original the Gandini design for that car looks quite different. It looks more like a Chisetta, actually.
Yeah. But mid-engine, think about this of the time. 5 valve cylinder, 60 valves in a V12 with 4 turbochargers. The defining characteristic of the driving experience that I remember is the tumble home was so severe that the
Countach is just like that.
It's worse.
Countach, I will brush my corner of my head on the top of the door. This
was the same sort of wow, you are really afraid of if you hit a curb with the front left wheel, you're knocking yourself out. But when I looked at the car from a technological standpoint, I think it was really, really cool. But when I looked at it, it wasn't. Artioli didn't get the recipe right in the way that Piech did, because when you start looking at stuff, it was all off the shelf supplier stuff. It was, I don't remember what the names were.
They couldn't afford to do the VW way, right? That's the thing about the VW approach, is they have all this money, and it's a sort of, maybe excessive to call it a vanity project. But it was. It was
a money-losing project, right?
Yeah. And so they said, whatever it costs to do this, it's worth it to us, and we're going to spend the money. And when you're reinventing a brand and as a businessman, as opposed to someone who is the head of a multi-billion-dollar corporation, you have to do things differently.
When you're nearing, you're way post retirement age, you've had the storied career that he has, which we'll get into at some point. You just want to show the world that that Veyron was a middle finger to literally everybody.
And the rest of the middle finger was the Phaeton. Yeah,
that's a fun fuck up. That was his ego getting a little bit too big.
But it is so Piechy.
It's Piechy? Is that a... I didn't
realize...
Pecular? Peculent? That's the most peculant. Peculent. That's halfway between Piech and petulant.
Yes.
He was a peculent.
Or truculent, which is also appropriate.
Okay. I don't think I've ever heard that word before.
Truculent means like aggressive.
Is this in like some separate hyphen dictionary that no one else has access to? But
anyway,
break
out the Google machine.
I'm not going to do that. The overwhelming feeling in a EB110 is you are in a Lamborghini made even more outrageous. But the only one that I drove was an SS, so it was the sort of sport package, not the luxury package. But it had diamond quilted, what looks in my memory like vinyl in the interior.
Yeah, on the center console or on the tunnel transmission.
Yeah,
tunnel.
it wasn't a luxury experience.
Well, yeah, the SS is more like that. You have the wheels that recall the vintage wheels, and you have wooden leather everywhere and carpet. I mean, that was a swankier interior in the SS.
But was it
in the GT?
In the GT, but
yes.
Was it really that? Was it Veyron levels of swanky?
No, of course not.
Okay, right. So the car strikes me ultimately unbelievably cool. I mean, I've tried to get one for Revelations, and we can't find one. And
yeah, they built very few of them. It was a commercial failure for sure.
But a different interpretation of what I think the Bugatti recipe was, by virtue of the fact that they use supplier parts, right? Suspension by other people, and who did the engine? I bet they did that in house. But I remember looking around and seeing different logos on stuff, and I was like, that's shocking to see that on a Bugatti when you think
like Magnetti Morelli or
when I'm sure there are definitely Bosch parts or Siemens parts in Veyrons, but I think they're better hidden. Chapter 1 though is really fascinating because the Torre Bugatti was nuts.
Yes,
I mean
comprehensively.
Okay, I'm glad to hear you say that, because I was a little bit like when I said that maybe he wasn't actually nuts. No,
I mean, I think I don't know. I mean, like I said, I don't know enough about the history of Bugatti. We're reaching the limits, and so to do a Bugatti episode right now is like, I'm ill-prepared.
I like ill-prepared, Derek, because you're still going to spout out more shit than I know, and I feel like I'm moderately prepared.
No, I got nothing. He is as much, I would say, like a lot of the guys of this era, he doesn't have any formal training, not formally as an engineer, and he didn't, he was as much driven by sort of like ego and vision. He chose who his customers were going to be. This was the thing that he was always famous for doing, was that you couldn't just have money. You had to be sort of well-bred by his definition, and this is this ancestral homeland of Bugatti is this facility, this chateau in Molsheim, but he basically would invite these people over who were prospective customers for his cars, and he would decide whether they were suitable or not to purchase his cars, rather than just whether the distributors took money from that person.
I love this. So I mean,
he solved the Enzo Ferrari problem in his own unique way.
Right. So he was born in Italy, right? And which I believe he referred to that as, quote, that accident, that unfortunate accident.
I think so.
Yeah. But was comprehensively French in his cuntiness, right? I mean, he was just not just going to make the best cars, but he was going to make sure that the owners of those cars represented him and his brand properly. And this is something that I think has some pretty strong merit, I have to say. I mean, there are luxury brands right now that are really struggling with who buys their cars and the direction that their forced into by the temptation to sell more and more cars.
I mean, yeah, that is, I think one of the most extraordinary achievements of the modern era is the way that we think of Porsche quite differently than how we think about Audi, BMW, Volkswagen, obviously, Mercedes. Despite the fact that Porsche sells a large volume of cars, there's still a level of prestige and panache associated with it, despite the fact that they sell, however many hundreds of thousands, 300,000 or 400,000 cars a year. Obviously, that's a different level of scale from the other manufacturers I just listed, who probably sell, I don't know, what is it, 1 million or 2 million cars a year for VW, not for VW, for Mercedes and BMW. And so, Porsche still has this prestige that they are able to achieve in spite of the volume of their cars. Ferrari, on the other hand, sells, 10, 15,000 cars a year. So Mercedes, different level, and BMW is a different level from Porsche, which is another order of magnitude different from Ferrari. Yet I would say in the minds of most people, if you're asking for prestige associations, you would say that Porsche is closer to Ferrari, I think, in terms of exclusivity and value of the brand.
A GT car, yes. So a 911 GT3,
I think a lot of people, like, if you're just a regular person, you're like, I drive a Porsche, and people are like, oh, it's a different reaction.
Same way if you say I drive a Maserati. Oh,
yes,
really?
That's true.
Is it?
And that's just a layperson perception thing. Yeah. But I think, what am I saying here? Porsche effectively has done this in the modern era in a way that very few other manufacturers have. Bugatti back then was doing it the old-fashioned way, which is that he would basically vet every single person who came through the door. Yeah,
there was one, that's the story I remember, I think it was a Romanian king or Romanian royalty that came and spent the night. So the whole thing was a trap, right? Please come to the Bugatti Castle in Molsheim, and we will entertain you and wine and dine you and show you what you're capable of doing. But what was really happening was Ettore was looking at them and watching, saying no. And he refused to sell a car to this king because he had terrible table manners. But I think there's really something to be said for that. I mean, well, look, I know that taking my opinions out of this, Cadillac is struggling because they will tell you as a luxury brand that their flagship is absolutely not the Escalade, but it is, right? I mean, that's the car that we all associate most with Cadillac, and that's being driven by Uber drivers. That's not good for a luxury brand, right? When the financial collapse of 2009 happened, Rolls-Royce's sales were up or unchanged, and Bentley was down almost 100%. There was like 90-something percent.
Down 100%?
Down.
That means
zero. They sold almost zero cars. And the reason why was the people who were buying Rolls-Royces were storied familial wealth, and they were old money, and they were immune. It didn't matter what happened to the poor people who, you lost your $1 million house. Peasant.
Is that still true for Rolls-Royce? I feel like there's a lot of nouveau riche.
But Bentley customers were struggling, right? These were people who were reaching, and they were the working rich, and they were an order of magnitude poorer than the Rolls-Royce customer, less wealthy. Or they weren't wealthy at all. They were just rich.
Yeah.
And there's an annoying distinction between the two. And you watched what happened in that economic recession. Now, after the recession, Bentley's sales boomed, and especially once the Bentayga happened and whatever else. But Bentley has now firmly cemented itself as an order of magnitude beneath Rolls-Royce because of the product that has come out, right?
However, and the loss of the Mulsanne, I think, is an important. I mean, that was the last of the old guard Bentleys, in my opinion,
which they couldn't sell, even though it was magnificent.
Yeah.
But it was the company's image was brought down, I hate to say, by the Continental, and the fact that some 50-year-old dude.
Well, that was the mission. Let's be fair. That was
Bentley.
I mean, I think so. Volume, right? Volume. The goal is to expand volume. If you want to print money, you have to sell more cars. This is why Porsche started making SUVs. This is why Ferrari is making SUVs. This is why these you were talking about, more Urus sold than every other Lamborghini model combined.
50 years.
For decades, yeah. So, that was by design to move down market. Everyone often tries to do this when you're trying to expand. Aston Martin did this with the I guess the first time was with the DB7, but the V8 Vantage does the same thing. But if you want to build a viable, profitable brand instead of a storied one, then you have to sell more cars.
Or you take the Pagani route or the Bugatti route and you make it truly spectacular and exclusive, and that has worked. Look at how long Pagani. So Pagani has now outlasted the original Bugatti, I'm certain. Right? I mean, think about it that way. Pagani's been around for a long time.
19 teens until the early 50s.
Was it really, they really making any cars by the 1950s?
No, I mean, they were basically didn't survive World War II.
Okay, but Pagani's been around for what, 25 years at this point?
Yeah.
That's one hell of a success story, right? And so going back to the Bentley thing, they really struggled. Rolls-Royce, when I've talked to people who work at Rolls-Royce, their biggest challenge is their customers, trying to guide their customers to have a little bit more taste with their color choices, so they'll have these blue cars with yellow interiors.
What is that? That's not a very old money thing to do.
No, and that's
all new money.
Rolls-Royce is worried about that, right? This is the thing that Ettore Bugatti was clearly fighting against. Was this person burps at the table? I mean, sorry, I guess I wouldn't be qualified to buy a Bugatti. Therefore, I don't want him in my car. I want people with taste. And the reason why is that Ettore himself was an aesthete. Everything around him had to be beautiful. And he was offended to the core, as only an Italian-born Frenchman could be, by things that were not beautiful. To the point where not only did he design the cars and the engines themselves and the firewalls were all machine turned, every piece of those cars was beautiful, but the fucking buildings and all the tools were designed by him. Like, that's where he goes from being like a guy with a vision like Ferdinand Piëch to fucking nuts. Every tool, he made the tools because they were not of sufficient quality and were not beautiful. So all the tools in the factory, he designed and built. And the silverware in the chateau, he designed and built. Only could possibly be done by a French person or an Italian.
And so that's why the Piëch reinventment of Bugatti is a failure?
No, I don't think it's a failure at all. They got close enough. He got close enough.
But the utensils.
But this fork is not beautiful. It's from IKEA. Okay. I think Piëch got 95% of the way there, right?
I agree.
More so than Artioli did.
Yes.
Artioli made a car that
he might have had that vision, but it's immensely expensive to do that. You have to be able to piss away many millions of dollars to do that. And Piëch was in a position to do that.
Yeah, which is crazy. I mean, then it built a factory for the car, right? But did not build, and I'm sure probably built the tools, but they were not all done with an aesthetic mind.
It was a more Italian approach, I'm sure.
Whose? Artioli?
Artioli, yes.
The car is magnificent. I can't wait to drive one again. And I would love to tell that story, but
I'm interested also. Having never driven one.
The difference between the Artioli era chapter 2 and the original Ettore era, honestly, if there's one chapter of Bugatti that I don't
discontinuous.
Right. So far it's 2, right? It's the Artioli era, and I think 4 could be the same way. It's really going to be interesting.
We'll find out, but if it's supposed to be a V8, then that does
if it's
sound
that
like
4 liter, if it's the 4 liter Audi V8.
So you've driven a pre-war GP car.
Yeah. Wow. So I was on a Bugatti rally, and this was after Pebble Beach 10 years ago now. And Peter Mullen, who's now sadly passed away, but is, I believe, the largest or certainly one of the most prominent collectors of Bugattis, just agreed to let a journalist drive the car. And so I wound up in the car with a guy named Julius Kruta, for the American pronunciation, who, as it turns out, lived about 10 doors down from me, or his girlfriend was 10 doors down from me when I was in high school in Germany. So we're from sort of the same area. He was, at the time, Bugatti's historian. Absolute walking encyclopedia. Still in the Bugatti sphere, and just wrote the book on EB110 that I was planning to use on research for one of these days if I can get a Revelations car. But I was in the car with Julius, and he was like, okay, well, here's the way this shit works. Nothing synchronized. This is just, the rawest thing. And I got in the car with him driving first, and it's so narrow that I had to have
your arm out.
I had to have my right arm around him, right-hand drive. I had to have my right arm around his shoulder or behind him, and my left arm tucked in, or it would hit the rear wheel.
Yeah.
So my immediate response was stress. Like, we're going to die in this fucking thing. And then, it was mostly low speed at first, 35, 40, 50 miles an hour. And we would go to these lunches where, Peter Mullen and his beautiful wife, who was just the most elegant thing I've ever seen in my life. She had a headscarf and the sunglasses, and she would just get into this 1930s car and just drive it like it was, fucking Cullinan or something. She was amazing. And Julius knew every single person in every single car. That's a fake. That's a this, whatever. Just absolutely amazing. And that was the first time I'd ever been steeped in Bugatti's history. Like, stupid, embarrassing little things. Like, I didn't realize that the stand-up hood ornament was the thermometer. And so there was just I guess it was mercury or whatever the red stuff is.
Alcohol.
It was alcohol? Thermometer, and that was how you looked at the temperature of the car, and it was at the top of the radiator.
Unless there was an elephant there. Some of them had elephants there.
Okay.
An elephant hood ornament.
But then not a temperature? But then a real temperature gauge, or what?
Those are the ones that had temperature gauges inside.
These were GP cars, right? These were Grand Prix cars. They were meant to be light. But, things like the oiling, the flow-through oiling that I had never really been experiencing.
With the charging system, it's driven off of the drive shaft. The generator is under the seat, and it's driven off of the drive shaft. So it charges...
really early cars?
Like 20s, late 20s.
Oh, really?
And so the car is charged by the drive shaft turning instead of the crankshaft
So sitting
turning.
in traffic,
So you're
right. SOL.
But it's magneto ignition.
It was the whole experience of starting and running and interacting with it, and then driving.
Did this one have a fuel pump, or did you have to
supply
the fuel pressure?
We had to start the fuel pressure. We had to prime it, and then it would...
With the handle?
With a handle inside the car, but then I don't believe we ever had to do anything after that. I just remember the shift linkage being like vague. So the shifter is outside the car. It's not in the car with you.
The lever is.
The lever.
But the shifter gate is inside the car. And the lever comes out through a little
gator
thing that goes through the body of the car.
Your hand is outside.
Yes,
on the
your
right
hand is outside of the car, but the base of the lever is inside of the car.
And it
passes through the bodywork.
3-speed or 4-speed, but it was reversed so that I think it was first, second, third, fourth. So it was, first and third are towards the back of the car and fourth. It was a little bit backwards, but crash box, no synchros, wound up being very, very communicative. You knew really well when you screwed up a gear change. Had to time everything perfectly. It was supercharged straight 8, and it was genuinely holy shit fast.
Yeah, they were at 225 horsepower or something like that.
And probably weighed 1,800 pounds. I don't know what the hell it was. It was holy shit fast, but then holy shit no brakes, and so it had cable operated brakes.
Yes.
And
when you push the brake pedal, you can see through the corner of your eyes the actual look like bicycle cables actuating the drums.
Yeah, that's exactly what it looks like, bicycle cables. And we did have one fall off a pulley on this back road, and it was a little hairy.
Exciting.
We got it stopped. But the steering, last episode we talked about vagueness. Okay, this was over the limit on vagueness, because you could often do 180 degrees of steering input just to keep the car in a straight line. Suspension was obviously very primitive, but it moved. I mean, keeping up with traffic, absolutely no problem, which is amazing considering the car's almost 100 years old.
Yep.
But overwhelming to all the experiences. And we spent 2 or 3 days in it, just motoring around. And all of that was, okay, the power and the noise was unbelievable. The fact that it destroyed all of my clothes and shoes by spraying oil all over, and it was kind of funny. But the lesson that I learned that I had not realized is spending so much time with this car, every single thing is a piece of jewelry.
Yes, that is very, very true about that car.
The cam covers, just to remember Bugatti cam covers. If you guys ever get a chance to interact with one of these cars, just sit and look at the engine compartment, because the cam covers are sheet metal that's sort of formed into a box, very simple box, but every piece of metal in that thing is machine turned with a pattern on it. The spark plug leads are gorgeous. The gauges are gorgeous. The pedals,
all the mechanical, pedal. I was just gonna say inside of the car, because there's no carpets or anything, so it's just all the mechanical stuff is on display inside of the car.
And it's not done, right? You know, it was done by a guy who clearly, went to the length of designing all the fucking tools for the car because they wanted them to be pretty. I mean, it's all done to the level that you expect from a lunatic like that. Yeah. That's pretty cool.
And I would say, let's see, what else at the other end of the spectrum? As far as pre-war Bugattis go, I would say the Type 57 is also incredibly iconic. That's basically the most developed road car that they made before the war. The early ones also have mechanical brakes, which is a lot for a car that size, but they did introduce hydraulic brakes eventually. Those cars are everything that you would think of to go along with Peter Mullen's wife in terms of elegance and sophistication and the quality of the finish. You open the engine compartment, it's the same experience in terms of like beauty and visualness. Easier to drive. The engine noise of those cars, the inline 8, to me is sort of really up there. There is a combination of sort of mechanical noise and the exhaust, which is just absolutely unmatched. I mean, maybe an Alpha 8C.
What I loved about it was
supercharged.
It was filthy. Like not only physically dirty, filthy inside the car as it's dumping oil on your feet, but the sound was angry and bitter and totally and completely out of character with how beautiful every piece of the car was. And I loved that. Yeah. That's,
it's, that to me is one of the best sounding straight 8s. It's Bugatti Type 57 and Alpha 8C.
57, is it loud?
It can be. It depends on the specific car, but they definitely can be.
Yeah. The straight 8.
Usually they are.
In the Type 51C was very, very loud.
Yeah.
And I loved it. I mean, I loved the whole experience of it, but I can't imagine mapping that into a car with an elegant, coach built-y looking interior. Well, coach built interior.
Yeah. It somehow works. It's loud and it sounds great, but it's not offensive. Inside the car, I mean, it's pretty present also. It really depends on the car. Some of them are set up in a more aggressive way than others. But, because they had the S, which stands for, I think, Surbaissé, which is lowered. And so those ones look even more outrageous because it has a very sort of high aspect ratio body because the chassis is lower. The whole car is, and these are the ones that are worth the big money, are the S's and SCs, C's for compressor, supercharged, but you could get them without superchargers also. But yeah, those cars, it also has this characteristic, which I think is representative of how far cars went in those 10 years between the late 20s and the late 30s, is that the car, despite looking like a steamship, is actually pretty easy to drive if it has the hydraulic brakes. Yeah. And that's very different from the cars that they made in the late 20s, early 30s. Like the other one that stands out to me is the Type 29, which I drove, which is a little 4-cylinder runabout type car. It doesn't look like a Grand Prix car at all.
I mean, I have to have a runabout Bugatti. I mean,
I meant that in the style, bodywork style. Right, and it, that was much less refined and usable as a car than the Type 57, which is a car that is a long-distance continental tourer type car, but still with a very strong sporting character.
I would like to drive one of the Brescias, one of the little 4-cylinder cars, because they're really tiny.
Yeah.
They're really tiny, and I can't imagine what that they sound like in the car, because they sound pretty spicy outside.
Yeah, it'll be like a K car from the 20s.
Right. Yeah. I think that, as you're talking about the interior of the 57, I can't help but think that Pagani's got to be the closest thing there is to a modern Bugatti. Off the shelf Mercedes engines notwithstanding, in terms of every piece being crafted.
But there's a sort of whimsicalness and slightly frivolous character to Pagani's, which Bugattis do not possess. Bugattis have this elegance and effortlessness. There's nothing effortless about a Pagani. It's trying so hard, and you can see that when you look at it.
True.
A Bugatti is not like that. A Bugatti is not trying hard. It just is beautiful.
Well, it's French instead of more Italian / South American, right?
Yeah. True.
Yeah, interesting.
We should probably at some point do another episode on the early history of Bugatti, because I just don't know enough about it, but I should educate myself. I just haven't had occasion to do that.
Now that you've said that is a tax write-off to buy those books.
Okay. Just like it's a tax write-off to buy a, Phaeton?
EB110.
EB110. I was going to say Phaeton instead, but you're aiming high.
I'm aiming high. Okay. This was a surprise discussion about Bugatti started by a rumor or a statement from
Watch it all be true. And so the premise of this is, well, it doesn't matter. This lives briefly on the internet.
I think to sum up, I agree with you. I don't care where that V8 comes from, unless it's some outrageous 10,000 RPM, really bespoke thing. I'm not convinced that it's the right engine for Bugatti.
Yep.
And so
you can do better, Bugatti. It's not too late.
Yep.
Not that, there's a lot of consumers here who are...
Not that you or I are in the market.
Yes, exactly. And we are not qualified to comment on this in any way, shape, or form. All right, this has been the Carmudgeon Show. Thanks for joining us. We'll join you next time with, I don't know, whatever we decide right before we record the episode.
Or even while we're recording it.
Yes, like we did today.